First, welcome everybody to the second monthly Texas Housers Big Tent call. We're organizing these calls because we think it's important to bring policymakers, attorneys, advocates, the media, and the general public into one discussion about the nexus of issues around COVID and housing. I'm Eli Barish with Texas Housers, and I'll be moderating a panel discussion with our four superb panelists, who I will introduce in just a minute. First, I want to say the call will be an hour long, so we won't go past 1:30. We've prepared some questions for the panelists, but the audience can also submit questions over Zoom and Facebook, and we will select some of those questions to ask the panelists in the second half of the hour. So you can submit questions at any time, and we'll just be collecting them. Before we start, I also wanted to thank my colleagues at Texas Housers, Cristina Rosales, Julia Orduña, Ali Harris, and Michael Deepland for helping to organize this call. Our topic today is post-COVID rental assistance programs in the state of Texas. I think we all know by now that COVID is about as bad as it's been in the US. Less than a week ago, Texas became the first state to reach 1 million cumulative COVID cases since the beginning of the crisis, and we recently surpassed 20,000 total deaths. At the moment, Texas is ranked second behind Illinois for the 7-day daily average number of new cases at 10,748. Although the economy has started to improve, recovery has been slow, and the growing segments of the economy are also the ones most vulnerable to COVID, in particular the service industry. Unemployment in Texas, which had peaked in May at 13.5%, dipped over the summer before ticking back up in September to 8.3%. For comparison, the highest unemployment rate Texas reached during the 2008 Great Recession was also 8.3%. Since the beginning of the crisis, most cities and counties in Texas have had rental assistance programs to keep low-income residents housed during the pandemic, in part because displacement from housing can fuel the spread of COVID. However, a spate of recent news stories in Texas have suggested that some local city and county rent relief programs have struggled to distribute money to residents in need. With that in mind, Texas Housers wants to facilitate an open and honest conversation about how we can get our rental relief programs working as well as they possibly can, so that the residents with the most need do not lose their homes during the pandemic. For that reason, I am so excited to be sharing this conversation with our four panelists. They're from diverse backgrounds, they come from different areas and have unique expertise, and I'm just so grateful to be introducing them. Veronica Soto is the director of the Neighborhood and Housing Services Department in the city of San Antonio, with over 20 years of experience in planning, housing, and neighborhood development. She previously served as the director of the Community and Human Development Department in the city of El Paso. Earlier in her career, Ms. Soto was the director for community development for Sunland Park, New Mexico. Rebecca Ye is a senior research analyst at the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. Her work evaluates the implementation and effectiveness of state and local emergency rental assistance programs and other COVID-19 responses. Ms. Ye has published several white papers with the NLIHC on rent relief and COVID and has built a database of hundreds of rent relief programs from around the country. Stephen Ellsesser is the El Paso County Commissioner David Stout's senior policy advisor, and he is responsible for policy areas including healthcare, criminal justice, immigration, and economic development. Mr. Ellsesser practiced law in Ohio for 2 years before relocating to Texas, where he has worked in government relations for more than 6 years. He has drafted successful legislation involving mental health and intellectual and developmental disabilities, and he also helped advance legislative changes that bolstered economic development in downtown El Paso. Licensed in Texas, he maintains an active pro bono practice representing asylum seekers. Josephine Lopez-Paul is an organizer with the network of Texas IAF organizations and currently the lead organizer with Dallas Area Interfaith, a coalition of 10 organizations across the state working in congregations, schools, and nonprofits. Her advocacy has focused on changing existing city code to benefit low-income communities and assisting the immigrant community in a variety of ways, including building trust with the government and the police and helping permanent residents to apply for citizenship. Thank you all so much for being here, and without further ado, let's get into the questions. So I want to start by asking, what does a successful rental relief program look like? I think before we talk about how to make them successful, we should have some understanding of what success really means. And this could be specific key performance indicators that your jurisdiction is tracking, or it could be a broader sense of success in terms of what you would like to see from a rent relief program. So Ms. Lopez-Paul, why don't we start with you? To you and the communities you work with, what would a successful rental relief program look like?
Sure. So from our perspective, we work primarily with tenants needing assistance and then advocating at the city and the county to help design those programs so that they can reach the masses. I'd say that the best indicator of how successful is a rent relief program at working is by how many people it's reaching and keeping them from losing their home. I mean, we're facing a crisis of evictions in our city before COVID, and this is just exasperated. And so I think that should always be the measure of, of how any city is doing, is how we're treating the most vulnerable among us.
Ms. Soto, what about you? When San Antonio was designing its rent relief program, how did you all decide to measure your success?
We are a city that has a program. We've been running it ourselves with a lot of partners that are part of it. And back in March, when we knew we were going to have economic impacts that would prohibit people from paying their rent and their mortgage, we knew success was going to be being able to keep people housed. So that's the broad metric. Can we keep people housed even as their economic impacts are not allowing them to buy the things they need, to pay for the things they need? So it was all about keeping people housed. And once we designed the program, it was about how much money we need. We probably have the largest program in the nation. It's 76.6 million now. We have over 37,000 applications that have been received and continue to be received. We have we have a live dashboards from picking at it. We have assisted over 21,000 families, and we even started keeping like the individual numbers. So over 57,000 individuals, that's the people in the households, have been assisted. We've had to just keep pushing the money out. So success also means being timely with the payment, because by the time a person applies, they may have already exhausted any savings they had or any help they may have gotten from family or others helping them. And so it is also about doing it quickly and efficiently. So for us, it's about keeping people housed and getting the assistance in a timely manner so that the folks can stay housed. Given that we're 8 months into this, now it's looking at what else can we do? Can we expand the program? Can we help people again now that we have additional funding? But the metric of can we keep people housed is still how we are measuring success. If we don't see a rise in homelessness, then I would say we've been successful.
Stephen, what about y'all in El Paso? Do you want to talk a bit about your role and El Paso's experience with rent relief so far?
Sure. And, as a policy advisor to a county commissioner, we're involved in discussions in terms of setting policies, determining what kind of funding allocations to make, determining how those dollars might be rolling out, and then just taking a look at where things are going to try to make things go a little bit more effectively. And, it's been a little bit difficult. We haven't seen the demand that we really anticipated, and we've had to relax some of the application requirements to try to make the gates a little bit wider. But in terms of what makes a successful program, I'll echo my fellow panelists in saying that keeping people housed is absolutely the number one most important thing. Not seeing an increase in homelessness because of evictions. I mean, that's That's critically important. And that's, of course, the whole reason that we're doing it. But in terms of other things that make for a successful program, I think flexibility and certification is a big one. And that's something that we've had issues with in the rental programs run by the county, run by the city, even run by the community action organization here, just trying to, because sometimes it's difficult to demonstrate the way that your life has been disrupted. You know, the role of the cash economy for a whole lot of people here has been a challenge that we've really had to work around in El Paso. And I think the other components are, one, being able to not only getting the money out quickly, but also trying to be flexible in how you're getting the money out, because different landlords like to be paid in different ways. And while we can't have community services standing with envelopes of cash out on the street corner, you know, the ability to cut checks, the ability to make ACH payments, and just to try to turn those payments around can make the difference for people, because if things get slowed down, then that time just exacerbates the difficulties that people face. And yeah, and then other than that, just messaging, being clear about what is available, who qualifies for it, and exactly how people can access that help, and making sure that that message gets to people.
Rebecca, you have a unique perspective because you're not based in Texas and you've been looking at rent relief programs nationally. Can you talk a little bit about that project? And when you're looking at these rent relief programs, what are some markers of success that you have in mind?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So at the National Income Housing Coalition, we've been tracking all state and local emergency rental assistance programs that have been stood up in the past, gosh, who knows how many months now. And now we're tracking at around 500 programs, but we're tracking a lot of different key characteristics like program eligibility criteria, what kinds of, how the funding is being distributed, who's it being distributed to, how much money these programs have. So right now, as I said before, we have 500 programs tracking over $4 billion. And I think that some of the things that have stood out to me is the lack of income targeting some of these programs have. Most programs are targeting at 80% AMI or below, but there aren't that many that are specifically targeting or prioritizing extremely low income renters at 30% area median income or below. And so that's a really key concern for us, because folks who are keying in at that income level have historically been rent burdened before the pandemic and are going into this pandemic with fewer resources. So that's kind of one key issue. But I think, as everybody else has said, helping tenants stay housed, super important. And something that we kind of look at that by is looking at the duration of assistance that is given by programs. So we're seeing that there are a lot of programs giving one-time payments, but some are giving up to 6 months and some are giving up to more than 6 months. And so this is obviously also a matter of funding and the funding source, but that's something that we've been looking at. And then helping tenants quickly is also really important. And I think that there isn't really a perfect way that we've looked at this, but in my opinion, the program application itself must be easy and simple to access and use. And there also has to be support to help tenants get through that application process, as well as time for tenants to overcome barriers that they may face during the application process.
Yeah, so we're definitely going to get more into the weeds of these particular program design questions. Ms. Lopez, Paul, I want to turn to you. We've seen these recent news stories about tenants who have struggled to obtain help. We've seen stories in Dallas, Montgomery County, El Paso, Austin, and other places about how programs are struggling to really distribute money quickly. From your perspective, what's causing these issues and what are the main barriers that tenants face?
Well, I would say struggling is an understatement. I mean, we've referred hundreds of families that have been denied after waiting for several months. And so I think in our case, there are some real problems in the way these rental funds were set up to first start out. The first money that our city put up was HUD and CSBG money, which is incredibly difficult and bureaucratic forms of money to give out when they were given, more than $400,000 in flexible CARES Act spending money. And so they chose to start with that fund, with that pot of money. And most people did not qualify. And then as a result, then when the other pots of money that should have had more flexibility were opened up, people just did not apply. And so that is, we're still sitting on a lot of money that we can't get out to people, and they may have to turn it back. Meanwhile, the CDC order is ending in December, and there's a real crisis in our city, and we're looking at upwards of 30,000 people being evicted in January. So to say that we're struggling, I think is an understatement. I mean, there's an epic failure on many levels of the way these funds were set up and the way they were dispersed. And most importantly, the requirements that the cities and counties imposed on these funds when the federal treasury rules were so minimal. They could have had great flexibility in the way that they distributed, but that process of documentation and verifying, and it has collapsed in our program here.
So, Mr. Ellsesser, El Paso is one of the parts of Texas that has struggled the most with its rental relief program. From your perspective, what's the issue been, and what can we do to make it function more successfully?
Well, I think it's a couple of things. I think there's a general awareness problem. Going back to the messaging, I think that people were a little bit slow to really find out what was available, and some of the programming that came through the local community action organization, they didn't have as much funding for advertising, but we were. I think we were a little bit slow to adapt on messaging, particularly as some of the areas with the county's rental assistance program, we are focusing on the unincorporated areas outside the city of El Paso, because the city of El Paso has its own rental assistance program for within the city limits. And a lot of these areas that seem to be struggling the most are some of the areas that are quote unquote hard to count areas for census purposes. And we've been kind of trying to transition some of the communication tools that we use to get out word about the census and drive up census count to promote awareness of this program. But another issue that we've heard a lot about that our community services department has received a fair amount of feedback on is just how the programming is relatively inaccessible to mixed status families and to families that may be concerned either about having an undocumented member of the household or more than one undocumented member of the household, and how that might affect them. And then the other side of that, the reinterpretation of the public charge rule, and people who have long-term immigration aspirations for being in this country and who have legal status being in this country, but are afraid that seeking this help during this time of great and spectacular need might have really unanticipated and undesired consequences down the road. So I think those are both really, pretty big concerns that have exacerbated things out here with our rollout.
So, Ms. Soto, I want to come to you with this question because San Antonio seems like it's been quite successful in sending out money quickly. And I know y'all have done particular things around documentation requirements, including self-certification, and particularly to help mixed status families. So can you talk more about why you think San Antonio has been successful?
Sure. So first, I think we're very blessed and lucky to have great staff that understood the need and understood our role in making sure people stayed housed. So very quickly, the whole city organization pivoted that our new mission as a city was response, recovery, basic operations. And so all of us knew, from the city manager to, the custodians, that we had to respond. And all of us had a role. The custodian by making sure everything was clean and safe. Everyone else figuring out how to do remote work. And so as an organization, we knew our mission was response, and response meant different things for everyone in the organization, but we knew we had to deliver on that, and that failure was not an option. So first, being clear on what we as municipal employees were to deliver and how that was part of our response was clear. And second, we had the infrastructure to quickly pivot and grow this program very quickly. I didn't have enough staff to run this kind of program because there is a lot of paperwork. And so the innovation and creativity to say, well, since the libraries are closed, and we don't want to furlough people and lay them off because that would contribute to the economic crisis, instead of them having their regular jobs, why don't we have them help on the response? And that was throughout the organization. So very quickly, we knew our conventions and visitor bureau staff were not going to be doing their regular jobs. The libraries were going to be closed. They were not going to do their regular jobs. So we looked at the skill sets of those people and said, but they're really good at customer service, or they're really good at accounting, or they're really good at making sure that we can track a spreadsheet. And so we used the talent that they had, good at customer service. We have a call center for people asking questions. A lot of people are asking questions. How do I apply? How do I qualify? That's one of the things, the communication that needed to be done. So we tapped people to do something new and different, building on their skill set, and everyone was willing to do it. I have had people redeployed for 8 months to do something else, and they're doing it because it's our mission. We have to respond, and if it means answering calls for 8 months, that's the job, and they know their job is important. If it means, I've never done a documentation for eligibility before, but I'm gonna learn, and I'm usually checking out books at the library, but I'm gonna learn how to do this because that's the job and I need to do it, and the people I'm looking at for their applications need me to do this, that's the job. So we had that attitude as a city, and all the redeployed staff that helped us staff up the program were willing to do it. It hasn't been perfect, but they were willing to do it. They learned, and we figured out how to do it quick. We mixed a lot of our money from the beginning because we knew we had mixed status families and undocumented families, and it shouldn't matter. They need to be housed. And so we mixed money with some of our federal funding, but some of our local money as well. So we knew that if we had that question of what about mixed status families, we could say, doesn't matter, todavía vamos a ayudar, we're still gonna help. Messaging in the languages, we have over 7 languages, I forget all of them, but messaging in the right languages helped us a lot early on. I traditionally work with housing and neighborhood groups. Well, I had to work with a lot of the immigration advocates. They were not, part of my regular contacts. They now are, because we had to reach out to that community. And so, sometimes I couldn't communicate because we ended up using sometimes French to communicate with some of our immigrant community. But I could do the Spanish ones. And so communicating with the advocates that could help get the word out helped us as well. We have an immigration liaison. So again, we have the infrastructure in the city. So we had already, as a city, we had already decided housing was important. We already had a program that addressed emergency housing assistance. And so the foundation for this rental assistance program was that we already had a city that cared. We already had a city that had an immigration liaison. So there was already a network of immigration advocates that we could plug into. We didn't have to build it from scratch because we had the foundation there. And then we knew documentation was going to be an issue. And one of the things that has been frustrating has been how slow the federal government has been to provide some guidance. Yes, the CARES Act money was a lot more flexible, but the guidance to the city didn't come out with the regulation. And so the money, we were all waiting to see if there was additional regulation or additional guidance. And it took a while for them to say, no, the very little guidance on the CRF money is it. But you never want to be a city that has to give money back. The Cdbg funding we stood up our program. We announced it in March. We adopted it on April 23rd. We had the bones for it at the beginning of April. And the guidance from HUD came out in September. You don't need guidance 6 months after you help the first people. Once we launched the program, the day we launched the program, we had to do it online, quickly pivoted to do an online application. That helped us well because we didn't want long lines out our door with social distancing. But one thing that did help us is that we knew our council cared, that the money went out, that we shouldn't care about someone's documented status or not, and that we had to get the money out to as many people as we could. So we knew that meant for documentation, we had to make it as easy as we could. From the beginning, we said self-certification was an acceptable documentation form, and we continue to accept self-certification. We knew the leases were going to be an issue, but we had templates of leases that people could fill out. And we said, we have the template. All you need is the first page and the last page. And then we would make sure we help people. Some of the grassroots groups, the immigration groups, as well as the advocates at the neighborhood associations, even some church groups, they helped us with train the trainer sessions. And so they became our ambassadors because they learned how to fill the online application, which was and continues to be in English and Spanish. And they would help their neighbors, and word of mouth in the neighborhoods. They helped each other out. And, people that I don't see eye to eye often, or, we agree on the same things, we just disagree on how to get there. But we're all on the same page when it comes to this program and helping. And so we set aside our disagreements and other policy considerations because this is what the moment is asking us to do. So the fact that we had the infrastructure, the mentality to help, the flexibility to move people into roles, the infrastructure with connections in the community with those groups that we needed to get the word out to, and the willingness from the community to help us be volunteer intake, because that's what we had to do. We do intake now, but it took us until July to set up our own center and hire. We had to hire temps to do that. And so all of that infrastructure was there before. We didn't build it the day we ran this program. We had the bones for it before. We just added the program on top. And we continued to add more money in tranches. And so I think that helped us. But the flexibility was built in from the beginning to get the money out as quickly as we could without being in violation of the federal rules, which are not the easiest. And I just wish the guidance from the federal, from HUD, as well as from Treasury, had come out sooner. Because, 6 months after, please, someone could already be evicted by then. We could not wait for the feds. We had to quickly and get the help into the hands of people that needed it. I think that's what helped us. But having the infrastructure in place and having the attitude of we care and we can do this is what really helped us not face the struggles that other cities have faced.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to remind the audience that you can submit questions on Zoom or Facebook, and pretty soon we're going to turn to some of your questions. So keep submitting questions and they'll get answered. Ms. Lopez-Paul, I want to take this question to you. You've worked a lot with immigrant communities. Which documents do you think are difficult or for them to provide, and how can programs build trust with those communities, especially mixed status families, and generally what kinds of barriers have you seen?
Well, so first I want to say that we advocated for these funds to go to nonprofit partners because we know that especially immigrant community trusts these partners more than going to the city or the county. So we were able to move some of that money to the nonprofits. The difficulty has been, or the barriers have been, one, the technology gap. A lot of immigrants do not have the high tech capacity to upload documents, and they have to be perfectly visible. And the other barrier is documentation of employment. And so for many people, within a day or two, they lost their job and they are paid cash. And so getting that documented and also verifying everyone's income in the home is nearly impossible for some of these families. And then you add the issue of language barriers. So, I mean, it was virtually impossible to get these funds into the hands, and it wasn't for lack of trying. It wasn't that, people didn't sit with them and try and do it, but it was just so ridiculous, the amount of documentation that's required to access funds that should be freely given to these people who pay taxes in our community.
Ms. Ye, Ms. Lopez-Paul brought up an interesting point about nonprofit partners. And in Texas, we've seen a lot of rent relief programs that essentially devolve a lot of responsibilities to local community groups. What have you seen nationally about how these programs function in regards to these third-party partners or any of these other issues we've been talking about?
Yeah, I think that nationally we've seen a lot of partnerships with nonprofits for the exact reason, partially for the reason that Ms. Lopez-Paul has stated already, because there's already trust in the community with certain nonprofits. So kind of that. But the other thing that we're seeing with these programs is that it's a really good way for a lot of these state programs that did not have infrastructure originally to use some existing infrastructure around nonprofit networks that already exist. Yeah. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. Mr. Ellsesser, so I wanted to return to El Paso and the issue of documentation requirements. We were hearing from Ms. Soto that part of the issue is concerns around which pots of money can be used for what, and HUD regulations and that kind of thing. You were saying that there was less need than expected in El Paso. Is it also possible that people are deterred from applying because of the various documents they have to submit? And which documents do you think cause the most trouble?
I would say that there's probably plenty of need, but the utilization is, I would say that overall it's probably underutilized. That's generally the expectation that folks seem to have. One of the issues that we had with our program at the county was that we were operating under legal advice and under guidance based on Treasury regs that limited the ability of using CARES funds to benefit for mixed status families in any way. It was relatively conservative interpretation of the regs whenever they came out, and a majority of the court was not interested in using a portion of our reserves to diversify the funding pools so that we could have completely unencumbered funding sources to try to meet some of this need versus potential limitations in that respect on the CARES Act dollars. But yeah, going back to what Ms. Lopez-Paul said concerning the cash economy and concerning the ability to document things and being able to document COVID-related hardship, the program at the city of El Paso, the program that we run through the county, they operated for several months before they started looking seriously at self-certification. And I think that was a bit of a change, although even that, based on the conversations that I've had, hasn't hasn't been quite the drastic change in utilization volume that we had. So it's been sort of a process in that regard.
Can I react to that, Eli?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I mean, I've heard a couple times that there's not enough need, and I don't think that that's true. I think there's tremendous need. I think the problem is that qualifying for these funds is so difficult that families get discouraged or they're afraid because of their status, and the money is not getting out. It's not for lack of need. I mean, we have people, when the fund opened up here in Dallas, they closed it down within 4 hours because that many people applied. So I don't think that that's accurate. And The other thing, the evidence that people need assistance and can qualify is through a program that we're doing here. When so many of our families were denied through these city funds, we worked with a nonprofit, and they are taking some CARES money, and they're able to give a cash voucher to families for whatever need that they have. And they can do that. They've been able to get money from the city of San Antonio and some other cities, CARES Act money. And if they can give it out in 2 days and have people self-certify, why can't cities do that with rental assistance funding? Why can't counties do that?
I mean, I don't have an answer to that. I'm not directly involved in the administration of the program. But we also have a program that provides more flexible funding for debit card payments to people who seek it. And likewise, we haven't seen a lot of applications for that too. It's my understanding. But I didn't say, and I didn't mean to imply that there's not need. Obviously there's need. I believe there's need. I just believe that the program is underutilized.
Can I jump in as well on this topic? Yeah, I think that this is a question that I've also been thinking about a lot lately. How much documentation is the right amount? And honestly, having fewer documentation requirements makes it a lot simpler and easier to get it out. And that would, in my ideal world, would be what would happen. But I think that a lot of cities are maybe in a precarious position because they don't want to owe money later. And a lot of the guidance around this has been vague. And I think that some cities are afraid that Treasury or HUD is going to come back and say, oh, that actually wasn't allowed. So those regulatory bodies need to make these things clear early on, as Ms. Soto was talking about earlier. And then kind of a broader question around this, I think, is, there have been so many crises that have happened before, but nothing on this large of a scale. And, looking historically at how FEMA has operated really clues us into the fact that a lot of these emergency programs are difficult to access with onerous documentation burdens, and something that I hope to see that comes out of this at the end of the tunnel is making changes around how emergency situations are handled and how programs give out money in these situations.
Eli, if I can weigh in on this, I agree that cities are not known for being the most innovative. We often are accused of being the most bureaucratic, and there's a reason for that. You never want to be a city that gives money back to the federal government because you failed to follow the rules. And so that does make cities overall very conservative in our approach. And so innovation is not the hallmark of municipal government for the most part, though innovation does happen. But it's because of the system that we're operating in. And so what Rebecca is saying is one of the things that I too hope comes out. And it's not just for emergency assistance program, it's this whole penalty that we as a society place on poor people. We put a heavy burden on being poor if we want those poor people to get assistance. And, I grew up on food stamps, and I grew up being on a waiting list for public housing. And I know how intimidating that was for my mother, but she needed the help, and she had the kids who needed to be fed. And we put a big burden on being poor as a society. And this is just a systemic kind of thing. And so one of the things that I hope does change at the state and federal level, it will trickle down to the cities, is that we're not always penalizing poor people for being poor and placing these unnecessary burdens on them. Yes, we need to be good stewards of this money. Yes, we do need to make sure there's some documentation. Yes, there'll be some people who are not honest. And so you have to have some safeguards so that you don't have fraud. But overall, we place a big burden on any program that helps poor people in this country when they're trying to get help to improve themselves. And so I hope that that is one of the changes that our society makes going forward. And it needs to be at the state and federal levels because the cities will react to that. And if that tone is changed, then we don't place such a penalty on asking for help when you happen to be poor or need help. Then it will translate to better programs that serve our clients at the local level as well. So that's on my wish list. And one of the things that, when we write the book on these rental assistance programs, or the many books on this rental assistance programs that we can show, is one of the things that held us back. It's the penalty we put on people for being poor.
Well, I think it's much easier to blame the victim and just say, oh, well, these people, they just didn't qualify, or, and put it on the person instead of actually making the systemic changes that are really needed to make these funds move and flow the way that they should. We can just say it was someone's fault.
I want to incorporate some of the audience questions. I think we've touched on these themes already, but one question we've gotten is, based on guidance from the Treasury, what are the essential documentation requirements for providing rental assistance? Many jurisdictions seem to have issued documentation requirements that don't seem to be required by the Treasury. So in other words, they're above and beyond their requirements. And in your view, what should cities and counties require now to get families the rent assistance before December 31st? Anyone who wants to speak on this, feel free.
Well, I think the part that's curious is that when you read the federal Treasury rules around the use of the CARES Act money, it basically states that cities can use it for anything that they deem, they were impacted by COVID. And so they have great flexibilities with that. And so cities know that. And some cities, we've seen them swap general revenue funds and to put money into these rental assistance funds because they know they can have more flexibility with the CARES funding. The problem is that they've imposed all of these requirements. They're self-imposed. It's not, from what I've read, I've not seen it in the federal Treasury rules. And I mean, they could be so much more flexible than what they're doing and diversify with these funds and try different ways of just getting the money out. So from my perspective, these cities are imposing regulations that the federal Treasury rules are not asking.
Thank you. We received another question about a list of possible best practices for rental relief programs. Ms. Ye, maybe you could talk about some of your research and how cities and counties might be able to use it to think through best practices for their own programs.
Yeah, sure. So I was mentioning earlier that we have a database of 500 programs. We've learned so much about them, and through research on those programs, as well as through media coverage on those different programs. And I think that, I don't know, actually, Eli, you also produced a very, very good and interesting white paper on this subject as well. So yeah, I think that there are a lot of good references out there, and I can link to them in the Zoom chat. I know that there's limited time left, so read it, and there are a couple of recommendations in there. So
thanks. We've received a couple questions about the new statewide rent relief program, the Texas Eviction Diversion Program. Mr. Ellsesser, this is mainly a program happening at the county level, is my understanding, currently in the pilot stages. Can you talk a bit about your experience of this program so far and how it fits into the overall puzzle of rental assistance? You're on mute.
Excuse me, I forgot to unmute myself. The program is administered by our local community action organization, and the way that the organization, or the way that the program is structured, is a little bit counterintuitive in my opinion, because in order to have access to funds through that program, an eviction has to be filed and a referral has to be made by a court where an eviction is filed to the organization that is passing out the funds. So in talking, we've been a part of a few conversations with the JP courts where the evictions are and our community action organization, and just training on what the program is, bringing it up to speed. And there are a whole lot of gray areas in how the program is supposed to be rolled out. You know, there's the 60-day suspension that comes along with being referred into the program, and just keeping sealing those records during that time while the program is being rolled out. And there's a lot of confusion on the part of the JPs from what I hear in the conversations that I've been a part of about even what that's supposed to look like, even though inside my head it doesn't seem like it should operate a whole lot differently from, say, sealing records and for an expunction case or something like that. Those functions, those thought processes also exist, but a lot of the guidance and a lot of the structure for the way that the program is being run locally is coming through the community action organization, because they're administering the program locally, and getting traction in some of the courts has not always worked out as might be ideal, because even though it's based on an order from the Texas Supreme Court, which obviously would have authority over local courts, a lot of the specifics and kind of filling things out is coming from a local organization that really doesn't have any authority over the courts. So just the communication delta between those parts is rather large in some areas, and it's led to the program probably having less impact than it otherwise would. And that's a disappointment, because it could be a pretty great program. I mean, up to 6 months of assistance through that program, it's the kind of thing that could really make a lot of difference, even though as you look at what is going to be invested in the ultimate statewide rollout of that program, and it's really quite a bit less than what the actual need statewide probably is out there.
If I could add to that, so it is the Community Action Agency in a county that is getting the money. In San Antonio, it happens to be that the city is the Community Action Agency. The pilot is Cdbg funds, and we're going to be the ones administering that as well. So we're getting the money to serve countywide. It's coming through our Department of Human Services, which is the department that runs our community agency. What is helping us with this program, and the pilot is not a whole lot of money. I think Bexar County, which is the county we're in San Antonio, we're only getting $600,000. We're supposed to get $500,000. And Austin turned money down. So that's why we got a little bit more. I'm sure El Paso got a little bit more. What we're doing, I agree, it's counterintuitive, because you want to help people before they get an eviction notice, right? And so to have this program only work at the eviction stage is I'd rather they give us the money to prevent an eviction notice being filed. But regardless, we know some people are getting eviction notices, so there's still a need, and we still will accept the money. We will gladly take any other city's money, because we can spend it quick. But it will help you. Call us, we'll help you design a better program. Maybe you have issues. Just like, we help the city of El Paso with their programs. So for us, we're lucky that back in July with the CARES Act money, we knew evictions were going to be an issue. So we set up a team to work along with the county at the eviction court. And what we were doing we were trying to get people who had hearings to be aware of our emergency housing assistance program. So in essence, we were trying to get them at the court and divert them so that we could have their case dismissed. We have 4 courts, but one meets twice. And so we had and we still have them. Anytime there's a hearing, they're there. We get the list of who has an eviction filed against them. So we're being proactive and calling them. And the courts were also great. But the fact that we were there as soon as we knew when they were going to start holding hearings again helped us. The judges all have great relationships with her staff team. When they send a hearing notice for a court date, we crafted a document that they send to the plaintiff and the defendants, so the tenant and the landlord, saying, hey, the city has this emergency housing assistance program. The county has their own emergency housing assistance program, be aware of it, apply before you come to court. And if people still miss that, at court, we would have a laptop and be taking the application. So we're turning that court team and are hiring 2 other people because the state does have a few more, again, the burden we place on poor people, a few more requirements that we have to fill out, including certification forms that both the landlord and the tenant have to fill out. We started doing paper applications, but we're tweaking our online system so that we can do applications online. Our hope is that we do well with this program. It does cover up to 6 months, and so that's significant, and that's a lot. 5 months can be in arrears. So our hope is that we do so well in this program. But $600,000, 6 months, we might help just over 100 people. That's not a lot of people when you see the eviction rolls, right? And yes, evictions have slowed down, but they're still being filed. And there's still that guidance from the White House a couple of weeks ago that suddenly, after that Friday, the next Monday, the eviction filings went up. So talk about mixed messages, right? Anyways, our hope is that we do so well with this program. We already have the first referrals because of that partnership we started back in July, that in January, we hope to get a heck of a lot more money. We also hope to get Cdbg money for rental assistance program in January. That's something else that's in the works besides this eviction diversion program. But our hope is that we are doing so well getting the money out the door so quickly that we get more money. So any other Texas cities out there, if you don't get your act together, San Antonio's gonna get your money. Fair warning, okay, guys?
Thank you. So we have about 6 minutes left. I have a few concluding questions. Ms. Lopez-Paul, we received a question about the CDC moratorium. I think there's a lot of fear that when that expires at the end of the year, there will be not much standing between a low-income Texas family and an eviction. So what's your concluding thought on what cities and counties have to do, putting aside what will happen with the federal government? What do cities and counties have to do between now and then to avoid the worst case scenario?
Well, I started remarks by saying that Dallas was already facing a housing crisis before COVID-19, and we don't have the housing stock in our community, and we don't have the homeless capacity. So families are going to be on the street come January. When the CDC moratorium ends on evictions, we're going to see lots of evictions here. And it doesn't, there's not enough money to meet that need. I just want to say that, if we only examine the court dockets, we're not taking into consideration the number of families that are self-evicting before they even get a court order. And we're also not taking into consideration the number of families that have already multiple families living together in 1-bedroom apartments. And so this problem is much larger than whatever data we're recording. It is going to be a housing crisis, and we have to prepare for that, unfortunately. And I guess I just want to say that, the focus of these rental assistance funds needs to shift from, oh, aren't we ashamed that we have to give this money back, to shouldn't we be ashamed that we have so many families that are going to be homeless come January?
Thank you. Ms. Ye, I want to turn to you. You've looked at a lot of these programs, and now you've heard more about the issues that Texas programs face. What are your words of wisdom for us? And the other thing is, Ms. Lopez-Paul touched on the long-term issues with a shortage of affordable housing stock. The NLIHC has been beating this drum for a while. So what are your concluding thoughts?
Thanks, Eli. I think that my words of wisdom, I feel like whatever I would say would fall short, because really the local administrators are doing a lot of hard work right now. And so keep on keeping on and maintaining flexibility in terms of being able to change the program if it's not working, and having the courage to say it's not working the way it is right now and figuring out why. So keep on keeping on. I think that there are a lot of programs out there that are trying to do good work. And And so continuing to trying to figure that out and solve that, whatever is a barrier in their program. And then in terms of the longer term, I think that we all know this, that rental assistance is not enough. This is, as Ms. Lopez mentioned before a couple of times, many cities were experiencing housing crises before this particular public health and economic crisis. So there is still a lot of work to be done. And I think that one thing that I'm finding really important is to being able to document what kinds of needs are still ongoing and making sure to fight for those.
Mr. Ellsesser, I think the problems that El Paso is facing are also being faced in a lot of different cities and counties that have not had a very successful rental assistance experience. And based on what we're hearing, this is just going to become more important as the CDC moratorium ends. You've had a lot of experience in government and with legislative action. My question to you is, how do you right the administrative ship when something's going wrong? What can you do at this stage to fix it? And what advice would you give to other jurisdictions with similar issues?
Well, I think what we've been able to do recently, and really we should have done a while ago to have a greater impact, is to try to make funding as flexible and as easy to access as possible. And I think going forward, there's a lot of action that's going to be required by city and county governments to continue to invest in this problem. If CARES Act funding is not extended past the end of December, then the problem is still going to exist, and there's going to be one fewer pot of money that's available to help try to solve these problems. So there's going to need to be a greater willingness among local governments to invest GR dollars from their budgets to try to solve these problems and to try to take care of the citizens of their cities and counties.
Thank you. Ms. Soto, any concluding thoughts on what we should look for going forward from rent relief?
Well, I agree that this health crisis has only really shown how deep our housing crisis is. I think it was very much out of sight, out of mind for a lot of folks. And so my hope out of this is that there's a sustained effort to address housing in all our cities, that it be not only from the cities themselves, because the cities themselves can't do it alone, but that the state and the federal government also invest in housing in our communities, that there are more financing mechanisms to address this, that we have more opportunity to create affordable housing, to preserve affordable housing, and to continue to ensure that housing is one of the things cities are well known for. So that's my hope. My larger hope is that we address the needs of poor people in our country. We wouldn't have affordable housing crisis if we didn't have low income and poor families. So, it's the income, just like they say, it's the economy, stupid. It's an income issue. So it's about wages and the kind of jobs people have. Because if people had enough money to afford housing, we wouldn't have an affordable housing crisis. So what kind of jobs are we creating? And what kind of jobs are we training people for? And what kind of opportunity are we allowing people to have? So my largest hope is around addressing the issues poor people have and making sure they have access to job and training and education and opportunity, so that, it's not, so we minimize the number of poor people in our community. We fix poverty, we don't have a housing crisis anymore.
Thank you. All right, we're a little over time. I just want to say thank you all so much for coming and for engaging in this difficult conversation. I think it's important that we're candid about the scale of the problems we face, and that's how we're going to solve them. So thank you so much, Mr. Ellsesser, Ms. Lopez Paul, Ms. Soto, Ms. Ye. Thank you all for participating. To everybody on Zoom and Facebook, thanks for watching and submitting your questions. The recording will be on the Texas Housers Facebook, so feel free to revisit it and send it to your friends, send it within your network. Thank you all again for coming, and we'll have another COVID response call next month. Thank you again. Bye.